You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Nicolai Sennels, who's a Danish psychologist. He's worked for many years in the criminal world in Copenhagen, not as a criminal, but as a psychologist. And he's written a great deal about the work that he's done dealing with both Muslim and non-Muslim criminals in the Copenhagen prison system. Nicolai, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for inviting me to the show.
So in the work that you've done, and you've written a book about a number of the differences, can you give us a brief account of some of your conclusions?
Yeah, I had more than 100 Muslims as clients, and also more than 100 Danish clients as a psychologist, and they were all more or less in the same age group and had the same social background. So the only major difference between the two groups are the religious background. And I found that there are four main differences between the two groups, and one is that while Westerners are brought up to feel that anger is a negative feeling, most Muslims are brought up to feel that anger is a way to show strength. Second difference is that the honor concept that Muslims are brought up with makes them very insecure. Thirdly, while we in the West are mainly brought up to have what is called an inner locus of control, meaning that we feel that we decide our own lives. In the Muslim culture, people are brought up to have a so-called outer locus of control, meaning that they feel that their lives are mainly governed by outer factors. And then finally, Muslims are brought up to feel that there's a very big difference between Muslims and non-Muslims, and that Muslims are superior to non-Muslims. That are the four main conclusions that I reached. Okay.
Have others reached similar conclusions? Have there been other professionals like you have looked at this?
Yeah, there's a lot of studies. It's not all of them that reach that reach the media. There's actually quite a lot. One of the studies that did reach the media was a major German study where several thousands young people were interviewed, and the conclusion was that the more religious Muslims are, the more aggressive they are. So there is apparently a connection between getting into Islam and studying it and practicing, and then developing a more aggressive behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's the same conclusion that I reached.
Okay, and this has certainly led to a number of issues with integration of Muslim immigrants into Europe. Certainly, there's been a lot of difficulty in the immigrant population. Do we find this in other immigrant populations that have come into Europe?
Well, we don't really hear about them. You hear a bit about it, that it can be difficult to integrate gypsies, but it's for different reasons, and they are much less aggressive, especially on the political level. They're much less aggressive. On the other hand, there's also much more Muslims in Europe than gypsies, and that's why we should be more concerned about that.
I see. So from your study, your conclusions are that because of the specific points you were making related to anger and honor and lack of tolerance for the host culture, you think this has led to them having a greater instance of being incarcerated?
Yeah, definitely. It's also, if you look at the statistics, and especially if you work in the prisons and talk with the people, you will see again and again that while Muslims are very overpopulated or overrepresented in our prisons, their victims are almost always non-Muslims. The only cases where the victims are also Muslims are if it's in connection with honor violence or in rivaling gangs. And this is definitely because of the view that Muslims are taught to have on non-Muslims.
Is there a lot of gang violence or gangs in Denmark?
Yes, there's a lot right now. The latest count was that the police is keeping an eye on 131 gangs in Denmark, and only about a handful is not Muslim.
Mm-hmm. We are speaking with Nicolai Sennels, who's a Danish psychologist. He's studied crime in Denmark and done a great deal of study about the about how different people come to crime, and has noted that there seems to be a real connection between the Islamic immigrants to Denmark and crime. I'd like to, it's my sense, because I am not an expert in this field, and in fact this is a personal finance show, it's my sense that this is a rather controversial topic in and of itself, but let's look forward a little bit. You've been living in Denmark your whole life, and you've certainly seen a number of changes. Where do you think things are going? And specifically what I'd like to touch on is if there's a huge change in the way the culture acts, in the way that crime is taken care of, how will that affect people who want to invest over the long term in Europe?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in economy like you are, but we are definitely, it's very clear that the failed integration of Muslims in Europe, and we have a two-figure amount of millions of Muslims here in Europe now. The problems with integration of Muslims is definitely contributing to the worsening economy in Europe. I know, for example, as the latest study in Denmark show that what we call a non-Western immigrant, which is almost always a Muslim, they cost what amounts to about 300,000 euros during a lifetime. That's only counting the expenses for social benefits. On top of that comes expenses for health, for extra help in school, for police, for prisons, and so on.
Isn't that something normal with having immigrants? I mean, immigrants normally are not very wealthy, and they do require a lot of help from the state.
Well, most immigrants do very well. We have quite a few Jewish immigrants as well, and from the rest of Europe and from America, and they do very well. Actually, the Western immigrants, they're doing quite well. They're adding money to Denmark. They're not taking money out of Denmark. So how
much economic pressure would you say is being put on the economy as a result of specifically this Muslim immigration, and how does the government plan to deal with it?
I cannot speak for, I don't know the exact numbers for other countries, but a country like Denmark, we're spending 16 billion kroner each year on social benefits for non-Western immigrants. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of expenses also in other areas. And that's an enormous amount compared to our national product.
Because this is already kind of a fact on the ground, there has been for many, many years growing immigration to Europe, and certainly it looks like it's not slowing down too much. In order to deal with this problem, what policy changes could Denmark and other European countries make?
It's clear that we should stop immigration from Muslim countries. That's very clear. It has only harmed our economy and our culture, and it's both has been harmed in an immense degree. Besides that, then the immigrants that we have here, we should simply make it so economically unbeneficial not to integrate that the only attractive option would be to immigrate back to their home countries, possibly with some help, with some economic help, like we do here in Denmark, where we pay what amounts to about 15,000 euros to immigrants who choose to give up their residence here in Denmark and move home.
Is it otherwise difficult for someone to immigrate to Denmark?
For Western immigrants, they do very well. I have a lot of friends here in Denmark who come from other Western countries. So in general, it's not. But of course, if you're not really interested in integrating, it's in which many, I would say most non-Western immigrants are not. Then why should you? Because whether you integrate or not, our welfare system is so big and so strong that they will anyway get a lot of money and free housing, food on the table. There's a lot of extra social benefits that you can get in countries like Denmark, whether you if you don't work. On top of that, especially Muslims have the problem that they're not allowed by their family and the surrounding Muslim community to integrate and adapt to a Western lifestyle. And finally, it's simply difficult even if you wanted to and you were allowed to, learning the language, adapting to our culture and so on.
Okay, we are speaking to Nicolai Sennels, who's a Danish psychologist. He's been talking to us about some of the changes that have been going on in Denmark as a result of the Islamic immigration to the country. Tell me, I'm getting a little bit of a pessimistic feeling from this conversation. Is there anything that those of us on the outside who look at Europe and we are investors into Europe, is there anything positive that we should be looking towards, or is it as bleak as you're saying?
Well, I don't think so, actually. I think I don't see any positive signs. Also now it seems that we now have so many Muslim immigrants in Europe now that they are starting to be able to vote the presidents they want, as we saw now lately. We saw in France now, François Hollande was elected with a difference with about 1.3 million votes. 1.3 million votes for separating him from the conservative candidate. And there are more than 2 million Muslim voters in France, and 93% of them are voting on socialists. So, yes, it's really a very big power now in Europe, and there's nothing that they're not contributing in any positive way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in the last few seconds before we finish up, could you just tell people how can they follow your work?
I'm very much connected to the work of Robert Spencer. So if you look at his homepage, jihadwatch.org, you will find a lot there. Or you can just Google my name; you will find a lot.
Okay, Nicolai Sennels, it's been very interesting talking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Yes, thank you, Doc. Thank you for inviting me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.